There are people who exist in your orbit, friends, colleagues, names you recognize, who never speak into the digital void. They don't post, they don't share, they don't broadcast their breakfast or their breakdowns. And in a world that has confused visibility with value, their silence feels almost radical. But what if I told you that silence is not emptiness? That the absence of a digital footprint is not the absence of a life fully lived? That some of the most conscious, most present people you'll ever encounter are the ones who have chosen to disappear from the feed? This is not a story about fear or inadequacy. This is a story about something far more profound. The psychology of those who refuse to perform. The quiet rebellion of those who've learned that being seen is not the same as being known. This is the psychology of silence in the digital age. We live in an age of relentless documentation. Every moment, every meal, every minor epiphany is captured, filtered, captioned, and offered up to the algorithm gods. We've built cathedrals of attention where the currency is likes and the liturgy is performed 3 times a day. Morning affirmations, afternoon updates, evening reflections. And yet, there are those who walk past these digital altars without kneeling, who witness the world without announcing that they've witnessed it, who feel deeply without needing an audience to validate the depth of their feeling. This is the paradox. In an era where invisibility is treated as a kind of social death, some people have chosen to become invisible on purpose. Not because they're hiding, not because they have nothing to say, but because they've discovered something the rest of us are still learning. That there is a difference between existing and performing existence. The non-poster is not absent from life. They're absent from the performance of life. And that distinction, that razor-thin line between being and seeming, is where the entire psychology lives. They watch, they scroll, they bear witness to your curated joys and manufactured crises, but they do not contribute to the noise. They've become anthropologists of the feed, studying the rituals of digital tribes while refusing to don the ceremonial mask themselves. Why? What do they know that we don't? Let's descend into the architecture of this silence. Because it's not one thing. It's not a single psychological profile or a neat diagnosis. The reasons people don't post are as varied as the reasons people do, but they share certain threads, certain patterns that weave through the quiet. First, there's the acute self-awareness. The non-poster has looked into the mirror of social media and seen not just themselves, but the performance of themselves. They've felt the subtle corrosion that happens when you begin to experience life through the lens of how you'll describe it later. When the sunset becomes less about awe and more about angles. When grief becomes a caption, when joy must be justified with proof. They've felt this, and they've recoiled. Because here's what they understand. Every post is an act of translation. You take the 3-dimensional complexity of your lived experience and flatten it into pixels, into words, into curated images that can never, will never capture the texture of the actual moment. And in that translation, something essential is always lost. The non-poster chooses not to lose it. Then there's the exhaustion. Not the exhaustion of creating content, but the exhaustion of maintaining a self that must be constantly updated, debugged, and optimized for engagement. The digital self requires relentless upkeep. It must be fed. It must be consistent. It must perform authenticity so convincingly that even you begin to forget where the performance ends and the person begins. For some, this maintenance became unbearable. They looked at the version of themselves they'd constructed online and realized they were trapped in a character they'd created, one that demanded constant updates, constant proof of worth, constant evidence of a life being well lived according to metrics that were never theirs to begin with. So they stopped, not with fanfare or a goodbye post. They simply stopped. And in that stopping, they discovered something ancient and almost forgotten, that you can experience life without narrating it, that you can be moved without announcing your movements, that meaning doesn't require an audience, that silence, in fact, might be the most honest language we have left. There's a particular kind of freedom that comes with invisibility, a sovereignty of the self that can only exist when you're no longer performing for an audience you can't see, can't know, and can't please. The non-poster has stumbled upon this freedom, or perhaps chosen it deliberately. And in that choice, they've reclaimed something precious, the right to their own internal experience. Think about it. When you post, you're not just sharing a moment. You're opening that moment to judgment, to interpretation, to the projections of hundreds or thousands of consciousnesses that will impose their own narratives onto your experience. You're inviting commentary. You're creating a space where your joy can be questioned, your pain can be minimized, your choices can be dissected by people who know only the fraction of you that fits inside a screen. The non-poster has decided, no, my experience belongs to me. My emotions are not content. My life is not a collaborative project requiring public input. This is emotional independence in its purest form. And with that independence comes something even more rare: genuine introspection. Because when you're not constantly translating your inner world into shareable content, when you're not asking, how will this look? Or, what will people think? You create space for a different kind of question. What do I actually feel? Not, what should I feel? Not, what would make a good post? But what is the raw, unfiltered truth of this moment? Untranslated and unperformed. The non-poster has learned to sit with themselves, to be bored without broadcasting their boredom, to be sad without turning sadness into a narrative arc, with rising action and resolution, to be happy without needing witnesses to verify the happiness is real. They've discovered that introspection, real introspection, requires silence, not the performative silence of a digital detox announcement, but the actual silence of a mind that's no longer constantly composing captions for an invisible audience. In this silence, something emerges, a self that exists independent of metrics, a self that doesn't need to be liked to be legitimate, a self that is neither brand nor product, but simply a self, unwitnessed, unquantified, undeniably real. But let's talk about what the non-poster has walked away from, because to understand the silence, we must first understand the noise and the neurochemical architecture that keeps us trapped inside it. Every like is a hit of dopamine, every comment a small dose of validation, every share a confirmation that you exist, that you matter, that your perspective has value in the great churning machinery of collective consciousness. Social media platforms have weaponized our most fundamental human need: to be seen, to be recognized, to belong, and turned it into an infinite scroll of intermittent reinforcement. You post, you wait, you refresh. The notification arrives, or it doesn't. And in that uncertainty, in that variable reward schedule, your brain learns to crave the next hit, the next validation, the next proof that you're real. This is not metaphor. This is neuroscience. The non-poster has recognized this mechanism. They've felt the compulsive reach for the phone, the anxious checking, the way a post without engagement feels like a small death, while a post that goes viral feels like proof of worth. They've seen how their self-esteem became entangled with numbers that mean nothing and everything simultaneously. And they've made a choice to unhook themselves from the dopamine drip. But here's what makes this choice so difficult, so countercultural, so quietly heroic. We are biologically wired for social feedback. For thousands of years, our survival depended on our status within the tribe, on being accepted, on being valued by the group. Exile meant death. Invisibility was a sentence, and social media has hijacked these ancient circuits. It's convinced us that digital visibility is the modern equivalent of tribal belonging, that without a presence, we are exiled, that silence equals social death. The non-poster has seen through this illusion. They've realized that the validation you receive online is not the same as being truly known, that 1,000 likes cannot replace a single conversation where someone really sees you, that the dopamine hit of digital approval is a poor substitute for the deep, enduring satisfaction of genuine connection. They've chosen depth over breadth, intimacy over visibility, the slow burn of real relationship over the quick fix of algorithmic affirmation. And in making that choice, they've freed themselves from a form of addiction, so normalized, so ubiquitous, that most people don't even recognize they're caught in it. The algorithm promised connection. It delivered dependency. So what is this silence really? What are we witnessing when someone chooses not to post? It's a rebellion, but not the loud, performative kind that announces itself with manifestos and declarations. It's the quiet rebellion of simply opting out, of refusing to participate in a game where the rules were written by people who profit from your insecurity, your comparison, your endless need to prove that your life is worth living. The non-poster has seen the emperor's new clothes. They've recognized that performative culture, this constant pressure to document, to share, to prove, is built on a lie. The lie that visibility equals value, that if a moment isn't captured, it didn't happen, that if joy isn't shared, it isn't real. They know better, and in their silence, they're reclaiming something that's been slowly stolen from us: authenticity. Not the curated, hashtagged, Instagram-ready version of authenticity that's become just another performance, but the real thing, the messy, unfiltered, unwitnessed experience of being human. Because here's the paradox we've been dancing around. The more we perform authenticity, the less authentic we become. The more we try to capture life, the more life slips through our fingers. The more we seek validation from strangers, the less we're able to validate ourselves. The non-poster has broken this cycle. They've rediscovered what it means to live without an audience, to have experiences that exist solely for themselves, to develop opinions that aren't crowdsourced, to process emotions without turning them into content, to succeed and fail in private, without the noise of commentary, drowning out their own internal compass. This is not about superiority. The non-poster is not morally better than those who post. They're not enlightened beings who've transcended the digital realm. Many of them still scroll, still watch, still participate in the quiet consumption of other people's curated lives, but they've drawn a boundary. They've said, "I will witness, but I will not be witnessed in this way. I will consume, but I will not be consumed. I will observe the performance, but I will not become a performer. And in that boundary, there is dignity, there is sovereignty, there is the radical act of claiming your life as your own, not as content, not as currency, not as proof of anything, except the simple, profound fact that you exist. The non-poster has remembered something we're all in danger of forgetting, that before there were feeds, before there were followers, before there were likes, there was simply living, breathing, being, experiencing the world without needing to translate it into something shareable. They've remembered that silence is not emptiness. It's fullness. It's presence. It's the sound of a life being lived on its own terms. So here we are, at the end of this meditation on silence. And perhaps you're wondering where you fall in this spectrum. Are you the performer or the observer? The poster or the witness? The one who shares or the one who simply is? The truth is, it doesn't matter. This isn't about judgment. It's about awareness. Because whether you post every day or haven't posted in years, the question remains the same. Who are you when no one is watching? What do you feel when there's no one to perform the feeling for? What do you value when value can't be measured in likes? The non-poster has answered these questions for themselves. They've found their own way through the noise, their own relationship with visibility and silence. And in doing so, they've offered the rest of us a mirror, a chance to examine our own digital lives with honesty and compassion. Maybe you'll choose to post less. Maybe you'll post more, but with different intentions. Maybe you'll realize that your silence was never a weakness, but a choice you were making all along without even knowing it. Or maybe you'll simply become more conscious of the moment when you reach for your phone to document, instead of just being present. When you start composing a caption, instead of completing an experience. When you look for the angle, instead of just looking. The digital age has given us unprecedented connection, but it's also fractured something essential. The ability to exist without explanation, to experience without documentation, to be without needing to prove we're being. The non-poster reminds us that we still have a choice, that silence is still an option. That invisibility, real invisibility, can be a form of presence more profound than any post could ever capture. So to those who don't post, your silence speaks volumes. It says that you trust your own experience enough not to need external validation, that you're brave enough to exist outside the algorithm's definition of what a life should look like. And to the rest of us, maybe it's time to ask ourselves what we're really seeking when we share. Are we connecting? Or are we just performing connection? Are we living? Or documenting that we've lived? Because in the end, the most radical thing you can do in a world that demands constant performance is to simply live a life that needs no audience. The silence is not empty. It never was.